Artificial intelligence was supposed to be controlled by the companies with the biggest closed models. That assumption may already be breaking, because open-source AI is no longer just a developer culture story. It is becoming a strategic contest over cost, scale, influence, and control. And the next big AI war may not be about who keeps their models closed. It may be about who spreads their ecosystem fastest. For much of the recent AI boom, the dominant story seems simple. The future would belong to the companies with the biggest proprietary models, the most compute, the most capital, the most exclusive training systems, the most tightly controlled products. That logic made sense. Large language models were expensive to build, expensive to run, and increasingly tied to giant infrastructure budgets. In that world, control looked like a moat. Keep the model closed, keep the advantage private, monetize access, scale carefully, defend the ecosystem. But that story is no longer complete, because the AI market is now being reshaped by something else. Open source AI, not as a side movement, not as a hobbyist trend, but as a serious force changing how models spread, how ecosystems grow, and how strategic influence works. This is the open source AI war. To understand why it matters, we need to begin with a basic shift. Artificial intelligence is no longer only a competition over model quality. It is also a competition over distribution. Who gets adopted fastest? Who becomes the default layer in developer workflows? Who attracts the ecosystem? Who shapes the toolchain? Who spreads into the widest range of products, regions, and use cases? That is where open source changes the game. A closed model can be powerful, but an open model can spread. And in technology history, systems that spread widely often gain advantages that raw technical strength alone cannot guarantee. This is because adoption creates feedback. More users, more developers, more experimentation, more integration, more improvements, more familiarity, more lock-in at the ecosystem level. That is the strategic power of open source AI. It turns a model into a movement. And once that happens, the competitive logic changes. Now consider why this has become geopolitical. Reuters reported that a US congressional advisory body warned China's dominance in open source artificial intelligence could create a self-reinforcing competitive advantage. That phrase matters. Self-reinforcing. Because in AI, once an ecosystem gains enough momentum, it becomes easier to attract more users, more developers, and more downstream innovation. That is not just a software dynamic. It is a strategic one. If one country or corporate ecosystem becomes the center of open AI adoption, it can shape standards, influence workflows, and spread its technological footprint far beyond its borders. That is why open source AI is no longer just about openness. It is about reach. And reach is power. This also explains why China's broader strategy matters here. Reuters reported that China's new 5-year plan explicitly supports open source AI while also pushing broader AI adoption across its economy and building hyperscale computing clusters. That combination is important. Open models alone are not enough. Infrastructure alone is not enough. But open models combined with compute, policy support, ecosystem ambition, and domestic industrial strategy can become a very powerful mix. That is what makes this moment different. Open source AI is being linked to national strategy, not just product strategy. Now consider DeepSeek. Its earlier low-cost models already shook assumptions about the cost structure of the AI race. More recently, Reuters reported that DeepSeek's next-generation V4 model is expected to run on Huawei chips, while major Chinese firms have reportedly placed large orders for Huawei's new AI processors. That tells us something crucial. The open-source story is now connecting directly to the hardware story. This is no longer only about releasing models. It is about linking models to domestic chips, local ecosystems, and strategic alternatives to foreign supply dependence. That is how an open-source strategy becomes much bigger than software. It becomes a stack play. Model openness at the top, domestic hardware underneath, industrial strategy behind it. That creates a different kind of resilience. And it also creates a different kind of pressure for competitors. Because once open models become good enough, for many real-world use cases, the economics of the market begin to shift. A company that once needed an expensive closed model may now choose a cheaper open one. A developer may choose flexibility over exclusivity. A country may choose open systems if they are easier to localize, adapt, and run under local constraints. This is one reason Reuters Breakingviews described open source availability as something that accelerated innovation and adoption inside China and even benefited US firms. That is how ecosystem wars work. The value leaks outward. The influence spreads. The originating system gains reach. This also explains the dilemma for companies. Closed models can protect monetization. Open models can accelerate adoption. Too closed, and you risk losing the ecosystem. Too open, and you risk weakening the moat. That is the tension. And it is not limited to China. It is becoming a structural issue across the whole AI industry. What exactly is the winning strategy? Maximum control? Maximum spread? Hybrid models? Open core with proprietary layers? Closed frontier models plus open smaller models? The market does not yet have one stable answer, but the pressure is obvious. Open source AI has moved from side story to central strategic variable. This becomes even more important when we look at agents and downstream applications. Reuters reported that Alibaba is sharpening its AI strategy around agents that connect many parts of its business. Reuters also reported that Baidu is launching AI agents built around OpenClaw, an open-source agent framework gaining momentum in China. That matters because open ecosystems do not stop at base models. They expand upward, into agents, into tools, into workflows, into app layers, into enterprise systems. This is how platform battles deepen. First, the model, then the tooling, then the workflow layer, then the ecosystem around the workflow layer. Once that happens, the competitive question is no longer which model is smartest. It becomes which ecosystem is hardest to avoid. That is the real war. Now consider the economic angle. Open source AI can lower barriers to entry. That is good for experimentation and adoption. But it also creates pressure on pricing and business models. If strong open models become widely available, then some paid offerings must justify themselves more clearly. Through reliability, through enterprise integration, through security, through workflow depth, through vertical specialization, through premium tooling. That means open source does not only change who builds AI, it changes how AI gets monetized. This is one reason the open source AI war connects directly to the AI profit problem. When models spread more freely, value may move away from simple model access and toward infrastructure, orchestration, integration, chips, and enterprise trust. In other words, open source can compress some margins while expanding the total ecosystem. That is good for some players and dangerous for others. And that is why the war matters. This is not a battle between free and paid, in a simple sense. It is a battle over where value accumulates. At the model layer? At the cloud layer? At the chip layer? At the app layer? At the workflow layer? The companies and countries that answer that correctly may shape the next phase of AI. This is also why the open source AI war is not necessarily about one side fully winning. The likely outcome is more complicated. Some layers will remain closed, some will open, some will hybridize, some will fragment by region, some will be shaped by regulation, some will be shaped by hardware constraints. But one thing is already clear. The old assumption that closed models alone would dominate the whole future looks weaker now. Because AI is not only a race to build intelligence, it is a race to distribute, embed, and normalize intelligence across systems. And open source is one of the strongest mechanisms for doing that. That is why this war matters so much. It is not only about code. It is not only about ideology. It is not only about cost. It is about influence. Who becomes the default? Who gets integrated everywhere? Who shapes the habits of developers? Who defines the next generation of tools? Who makes their ecosystem feel unavoidable? Those are the real stakes. And that is why the open source AI war may become one of the defining technology battles of this era. Because the future of AI may not be won only by the company that builds the smartest model, it may be won by the ecosystem that spreads the fastest.